Ayawas ne ayanalage, jiza de weasta.
Seguzewaguego, and welcome to our Tetewatahronhkhahtsherattihánion video. That word, Tetewatahronhkhahtsherattihánion, means we speak different dialects. So we start with the question of why do we have different dialects? Mohawks originally come from the Mohawk Valley, which we call Ganyanke, and also from which we derive our name Ganyankehaga from. For various reasons, we have since left the Mohawk Valley and established 8 unique Mohawk communities. Those communities are Akwesasne, Kahnawake, Kanesatake, Wahta, Taindanega, also known as Gahtege, Oswega, Ganyange, and Ganatjoharege. Our dialects usually fall between community lines, although dialects can even vary between districts in a community as well as families. On the grander scale, the Mohawk dialects can be grouped into 2 major groups, Eastern and Western dialects. The Eastern dialects are Akwesasne, Kahnawake, Kanesatake, and Wahta. The Western dialects are Oswega and Gahtege. Ganyange and Ganatjoharege are communities that were re-established in 1974 and 1993 respectively. These communities speak the dialects of the various community members who established them, both communities having a majority of Eastern dialect speakers. Being that we are in Akwesasne, we will examine the phonetic differences between our dialect against the other dialects. It is important to note that although phonetic differences seem to be the most apparent feature between the dialects, that phonetics make up a very small factor of what differentiates the dialects. The most important factor to dialectual differences is the way that one would speak. The words that they use, the sayings they have, the jokes they make, and the overall flavor of the language. For example, if I speak Akwesasneha, it is not enough to change words such as Zagya into Zajya and Gashitage into Gasitage and then say that I speak Gahnoageha. To learn another dialect, one must spend countless hours with the speakers of that dialect to learn the way that they use, even oftentimes, the same words. The dialects that are farthest from our own dialect would be the Western dialects. This is due to the fact that our communities have been separated in some instances going as far back as 1680. So although the dialects have a degree of mutual intelligibility, the words are oftentimes used differently. Here we will examine just the phonetic variations. So Western dialects also use a Y in places where we would use an I, so that's just more of a spelling difference. But Western dialects have a unique use of retaining Gia, Ja, and Jia clusters. Here we see differences in spelling and pronunciation between the 2 dialects. So we'll start with the English. For the word they call me, in Western dialects they would say Junkiats. And that's also what we say here in Akwesasne, Junkiats. But there is a difference in when we look at the word for what they call her. In Western dialects it's Yumtagyats, where in Akwesasne it's Yumtagyats. Next is in words such as for us to swim, we have in Western dialects I Jadawa, and for Akwesasne we have Aye Gyadawa, and that's for you and I to swim. Next is for those 2 women to swim, we have in Western dialects Agyadawa, and in Akwesasne as well, we also have Agyadawa. For you 2 to swim, in Western dialects we have Aijadawa, and in Akwesasne we have Ayejadawa. So you can see that there is a difference in I versus Aye, as well as between Ja turning into Gia. Western dialects also do not do what we call vowel rounding. So for the English word I am mad, in Western dialects it's Waginat Quantum, where in Akwesasneha and other Eastern dialects it becomes Waginat Quanta. So vowel rounding is when we match the endings. So you can see the difference in the Western dialects. It's where for Eastern dialects it's so we kind of match the endings there. Another example is for the word it happened to him. In Western dialects we would say Nihoyat Dawam, where in Akwesasneha and other Eastern dialects we would say Nihoyat Dawam. So you can see that we are doing what we call vowel rounding. The Mohawk R is something that has been difficult for English speakers to pin down because it does not exist at all in English. English speakers tend to hear the Mohawk R either as an English R or an English L. So both of these equivalents are incorrect, as the true Mohawk R is somewhere in between them. In linguistics, we call this a liquid consonant. So I like to visualize the various dialects and their R's on a scale between an English R and an English L to show that the Mohawk R is neither an English L nor an English R. Although some dialects may lean more towards an L or more towards an R, they're really somewhere in between. So if we look at the Western dialects of Gahtege and Oswega, when you listen to speakers from there, you'll find they lean more towards an English R. It's not quite an English R, but it leans more towards it. So that's why some people call this a more rolled R or a trilled R, but it's more just like ra. And then we have Gahnawage and Ganasadage, which are kind of right in between an R and an L, not really leaning towards either one. And you get kind of a sound like ra. And then for Akwesasne, it leans slightly towards an English L, but I find in first language speakers, it's still right around and very similar and very close to the R sound in Gahnawage, which can be a controversial statement, but I would implore you to listen to the speech of first language speakers from those communities, and you'll find that Akwesasne is not so much a la, but more of a ra. Also, what throws us off here is that English has two kinds of L's. We call them full L's and light L's. And you can see when you say the word full and when you say the word light, those are different L's, right? L versus L. You'll find that Akwesasneha is much closer to a light L, but also still a tapped R. So they're much more similar than people think they are. And I would implore you to listen to the first language speakers from those communities and be able to draw your own conclusions. Also, compared to Akwesasneha, Western dialects have two diphthongs, which are two vowels next to each other, where Akwesasne generally only has one. We also pronounce them slightly differently. So for the English word her, for the Western dialects, we have agaunha. And although it is the same word for Akwesasne and other Eastern dialects, you may hear it pronounced more closer to agamha rather than agaunha. Also, for the word for us to speak, in Western dialects, you will hear the diphthong ai dewadadi, where in Akwesasne, you'll hear aye dewadadi, where we separate the A and the E from I to aye. These are some of the major phonetic differences between Western dialects and Akwesasne, as well as other Eastern dialects. All Eastern dialects share a more recent common ancestor dialect, which is why they are, for the most part, closer to each other than the Western dialects. The Eastern dialects began splitting from the Western dialects as far back as 1680, and Eastern communities have also brought in a significant amount of Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Huron people, which has influenced the way that we talk. In conversations with first language speakers, I've been told that the most apparent difference between Akwesasne and other Eastern dialects, mainly Gahnawage and Ganasadage, is the use of gya and ja. So Akwesasne uses gya in all places where previously in history there would have been a ja or a gya. I'll explain. First, we start with on the English on the right, which is you and I talk. So for pre-diaspora Mohawk, which is the theoretical Mohawk that we would have spoken a long time ago, it's theorized that we probably would have said diadadis. And in Akwesasne, all TIA clusters get turned into KIA. So here we say giadadis, for you and I speak. Where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, they say jadadis, for you and I speak. Then for two women talk, in the Mohawk Valley, that probably would have been pronounced closer to giadadis. And in Akwesasne, we retain that same sound, giadadis. And in Gahnawage, all jas are turned into gia and vice versa. So in Gahnawage, Gyadadis gets turned into Jadadis. And then for you to talk, it would have been in Mohawk Valley, Mohawk, Giadadis, and we retain that here in Akwesasne. We say Giadadis for you to speak. And in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, they've kind of dropped that I, and it's turned more into Zadadis. Which leads us into our next example, where we talk about how Akwesasne retains the I in the TSIA cluster, where Gahnawage and Ganasadage drop the I and only have a TSA cluster. So it's kind of the difference between Jia versus Za. So in Akwesasne, for the word riverside, we would say Ajakta, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's more pronounced Ajakta. And then for the word earth, in Akwesasne, we have the word Ohumjia, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, they would say Ohumza. So it's very slight, and you can tell in Akwesasne it's not quite like a J sound, it's more of a Jia, and in Gahnawage, it's more of a Za. Another change is that along with changing J clusters into Gya clusters, Akwesasne has also changed THIA clusters pronounced Cha into KHIA clusters pronounced Kya. So, for example, the English word every day or each day in Akwesasne, it's pronounced Kya Tetewatahronhkhahtsherattihánion, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's pronounced Cha Tetewatahronhkhahtsherattihánion. Also to say, like, I'm not following along, maybe in understanding, or maybe somebody's explaining something for a story and you say, I'm not following along. In Akwesasne, we say Ya Kekes, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's pronounced Ya Chekes. Another difference between Akwesasne and Ganasadage is the use of a unique singular pronoun for A-stem words. Gahnawage also shares this feature with Akwesasne. So in Akwesasne and Gahnawage, the English word you gave me is dagwawi, where in Ganasadage, they say dagawi. Also for you gave us to, it's pretty much the same thing with slight pronunciation differences that we've already talked about. Akwesasne and Gahnawage would say dagyawi or dajawi, and that's also what is said in Ganasadage, dajawi, and that's for you gave us to. But next is for you all gave me. In Akwesasne, Gahnawage, and Ganasadage, it's dagwawi. So we can see that in Akwesasne and Gahnawage, you gave me and you all gave me is dagwawi. It's the same word. So you usually have to infer from context because the word is the same, whether it's you gave me or you all gave me. And where in Ganasadage, they have the difference between dagawi and dagwawi, right? Dagawi, you gave me, and dagwawi, you all gave me. Now, although we don't spell this next feature differently, the SHI and HSI clusters are pronounced differently in Akwesasne than they would be pronounced in Gahnawage and Ganasadage. For example, the English word when I was a kid in Akwesasne is pronounced shigeksa'a, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage it's pronounced sigeksa'a. So in Akwesasne, that cluster is pronounced she, and in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's pronounced si. Another example is the word for to take your coat off. In Akwesasne, it's zagyatawihdashi, and in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's zajatawihdasi. Another word is my leg. In Akwesasne, it's pronounced kshinage, where in Gahnawage and Ganasadage, it's pronounced ksinage.
Nyawaji segos adawang stahagin na kanya geha tanot dosa anji sa niguha na tasat subscribe.